Roger Mosey. He's Master of Selwyn College, Cambridge, former Senior Executive at the BBC. John Caudwell is here with me in the studio, founder of Phones for You and a leading philanthropist. Rebecca Reid is a Telegraph journalist, and we hope to be being joined by Aisha Ali-Khan in just a moment, the writer and activist. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to put your question to our panel.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Steve in Shrewsbury. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Iain. Right, the question is to the panel. Do you think that Priti Patel is fueling racist rhetoric against desperate migrants by distorting facts, either deliberately or by error?
What facts are you thinking of?
Oh, well, the fact that 70% of them are just economic migrants when, in fact, it turns out that that's actually not true at all. 70% of them are genuine refugees who are able to claim asylum.
Roger Mosey, let's start with you.
Well, first and most obviously, my heart goes out to the people affected by the terrible tragedy today. And I think on the politics of this, I am fed up with people talking tough. I think what we need is people to find solutions. And it was striking tonight watching Channel 4 News, Iain, while you were on air. They showed pictures of French police apparently not intervening when a different boat was about to launch into the channel. And that is quite shocking. And the French need to sort things out. The British need to sort things out. It's unforgivable that relations between the two countries on this absolutely crucial issue are so bad. And really, I think whatever you think about Priti Patel or Boris Johnson or the French or anyone, it's a time they have to provide solutions to stop this sort of tragedy happening again.
We've been talking about potential solutions, though, for many, many months now. That the British government comes up with an idea, the French knock it back, the French come up with an idea, the British government knocks it back, and still the people smugglers seem to be getting away with it. And yet, as I've said before in the programme tonight, it seems incredible to me that the French authorities, that the European authorities, that the British authorities don't seem to know who these people smugglers are. Why not?
I agree with you completely. And I mean, the one piece of good news without committing any contempt of court is that people have been arrested today, and the Channel 4 film and other things we've seen make you ask the question, why has this not happened before? I think you're absolutely right, Iain. I think, though, there is also, though, a toxic debate on this subject in which you either have a position which says all immigration, all refugees should be banned, or there should be a free-for-all. And it's really important to recognise that there has to be a middle solution there in which you look at what practically can be done and how you can help the right people get into this country, stop the wrong people getting in. And it takes huge amounts of international collaboration. But it's the rhetoric of the political debate which doesn't help at the moment. And it's practical measures I think everyone is demanding.
Well, let's remind ourselves of the question, does the panel think Priti Patel is fueling racist rhetoric against cross-channel migrants? Aisha, let's come to you next. Hi.
Hi, Iain. Hi, everybody. I've been following Priti Patel's Borders Bill, and it's true that some of the measures that are being proposed are very harsh. You're going to people that are coming into the country illegally are going to face criminalisation, up to 4 years inside, family members being banned from joining them. And obviously asylum claims refused. And that kind of rhetoric around, people trying to come into this country, people who are escaping wars, people who are escaping famine. Look what happened in Afghanistan just a few months ago. These are people who are escaping really, really horrible situations in their day-to-day lives. We need to find solutions, long-term solutions. And criminalising people coming here for safety and to seek a better life is not the solution. And again, the question is quite succinct because it's talking about the attitudes that we've displayed as a country towards people who are coming here, who are looking for sanctuary, who are looking for asylum. And we've had so many years of this. Don't forget, we've had the Brexit debate, we've had lots of people saying we don't want people to come, etc., etc. So I think what Priti Patel has been proposing is just yet another example of the Conservative government not addressing the issues and not looking at the reasons why people are trying to escape their homelands and travel across mainland Europe in some of the most serious and most horrific conditions, and to come here. So I think definitely the rhetoric
do you
is
not
there.
think though that it is the job of the government to enforce borders and to try and deter people coming to this country illegally? I mean, you say that they're being criminalised. Well, if you do something illegal, that does turn you into a criminal, doesn't it? If I was to do something illegal, that turns me into a criminal. Why would it be different if someone comes to this country illegally?
My opinion is that people who are wanting to come here, they've made the process so difficult that people are forced to look elsewhere, look at different ways of getting here, which basically means that they are turning to human traffickers, they are turning to illegal means, and nobody's actually addressing the actual debate around why people are doing this. I mean, and this is not something that's just recent. This is something that's been happening for many, many years. I mean, look at the Syrian war when it first started 10 years ago, the influx of refugees back then. I've done a lot of work with the refugees in Greece, in Turkey, and other European countries as well. And the debate is still there. Unless we actually deal with the causes of people moving and wanting to leave their homelands, we're never going to address the real issues here. And changing laws and putting in harsh measures is not the answer, in my opinion.
All right, John Caudwell.
Well, I think, first of all, we do need a humanitarian solution. But that's a worldwide humanitarian solution where most countries that are willing to partake take their fair share of displaced people, of refugees and oppressed people. Is Priti Patel wrong? No, I don't think so. You know, the simple fact is we have immigration laws and rules. We should take our fair share of humanitarian cases, but the French are allowing this to happen, and they're allowing criminal gangs to supply boats and to ferry people across the water and allowing people to die. You know, I know there was a big debate last night on Boris Johnson offering help to the French, and I can understand the French possibly not wanting their help for the sake of national pride. But if they're going to have that national pride, then they need to stop this illegal activity of people smugglers being able to perpetrate their horrible crimes and to stop people leaving the French shores to become illegal immigrants to the UK.
But if you look at it from a French point of view, why would they stop people from coming? Because it means that they don't have to deal with them then, doesn't it?
Well, they do, because we send them back, and they're illegal immigrants who have to go back to France. But what about stopping them coming in from wherever they're coming in from Germany, from Spain, or wherever they're coming from? You know, and this is why we need a humanitarian solution, because we need to deal with this, not just on a European-wide basis, but on a global basis, where we all take our fair share of displaced people.
Do you think we are taking our fair share?
The UK?
Yeah.
I can't answer that because I don't know the percentages and the proportions that each country are taking. If we're not, then we ought to do. But we do have to take into account as well that Britain is a very overpopulated island. And so I think your fair share should depend on a number of factors, which includes the population per square mile and includes your economic situation. Now, economically, we could take quite a lot more than some countries. From an overpopulation point of view, we could take less.
Okay.
But all of that should be taken into account, and we should find a solution.
Rebecca Reid.
So I think my major issue with Priti Patel is that she seems to be doing the worst of all worlds. She says incredibly harsh things and then does absolutely nothing. So everybody on the sort of more lefty side of the debate is upset with the horrid things she says, and everybody on the more right side of the debate is frustrated by her total lack of action. So it's just a universally really rubbish approach. And I think on an issue as contentious as this one, we should probably look for the common ground. And the common grounds I can see are that people traffickers are the number one problem, and that our system doesn't work. So in terms of the people traffickers, we are pretty good in terms of our surveillance with regards to terrorism, and a lot of that should be able to be, a lot of that like intellectual property and intel should be able to be used to try and find human traffickers. In terms of our immigration system, it clearly isn't working because people aren't using it, and giving their life savings to a human trafficker is considered to be a better way to get here than the legal system. So that's a failing. I think possibly there is a conversation to be had about offshore processing, and whether there is a way to very humanely create offshore processing where people are safe and well treated, but the route to legal immigration is very clear and understandable. Because if English is not your first language and you don't have much money, then that is, being expected to kind of find some kind of lawyer who can understand it and then sort it out from wherever you're living is pretty unreasonable.
Do you think the Home Office is... John Reid described it in 2006 as not fit for purpose. And Boris Johnson this week appointed Steve Barclay, the Cabinet Office Minister, to intervene in this. And I wonder whether one of the reasons for that was that Priti Patel has lost confidence in the Home Office structures to actually pull the levers quickly to make any changes. And Boris Johnson has obviously lost confidence in her ability to run things in the Home Office as well.
I think at the moment what you're seeing is a realisation that this is one of the few things that really might change voters' minds. All the green issues, all the sleaze stuff, I don't think people actually care about that much in the booths. But the kind of people who vote Conservative do care about immigration. I would argue that sometimes their perception of how bad the problem is wide of the mark, but they do care. And I think Boris Johnson is realising that people care, because I think the fact that last year it was 8,000-ish people, and this year it's about 25,000 people, that is a very significant uptake. That isn't working, clearly. And I'm a very come one, come all person and very bleeding hearted, but that still isn't a system that's working if that many people, if we've had that much of an uptick in such a short period of time.
Someone on Twitter says, your female guest, Aisha, needs to make up her mind. 1 minute... Aisha, you need to make up your mind. One minute, she says these people are coming here to flee war and famine. The next, she says they're seeking a better lifestyle. Why aren't Arab nations taking in these refugees? Well, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. But the point about maybe some Arab nations taking in these refugees, I don't know, maybe Aisha, you do know this, I don't know how many people who are fleeing persecution, threat of death in, say, Afghanistan, Syria, whether they're all coming to Europe or whether some are actually looking elsewhere as well.
Well, if you actually look at the countries that have taken in the greatest number of refugees following the Syrian war, Turkey, Lebanon, we've had European countries as well, like Germany and so on. What we need to look at is that it's not just, it's an Arab world problem. It's actually, like John said, it's a global problem, and we need to find solutions that are going to basically address all these issues. Just going back to Afghanistan, Pakistan has had the greatest number of Afghani refugees for decades. This is not something new. Every time there's been a humanitarian crisis, there's been war, there's been invasions, Pakistan has opened its borders and allowed people in. But having said that, as a Muslim woman, I have been campaigning for years against the Arab world's just inaction, really, around refugees and around helping other Arab countries as well. And that's something I'm passionate about, I'm embarrassed about, and also I do want to see a change there. I do want to see people helping each other, especially amongst in the Arab world, across the Muslim world as well.
Rebecca, very quickly.
Also, I'm just wondering if there is an element of the fact that some of the reasons you need to leave, like being gay or being a high-profile woman, or some of those might mean that living in a country where those things are illegal is not really a sensible thing to do.
Fair point, well made. Stephen Shrewsbury, a quick final comment from you.
Well, sadly, I don't think the panel really answered my question, because it wasn't about the measures Patel is proposing. It's about the rhetoric and words that she speaks. Claiming that 70% of migrants are economic migrants rather than refugees fleeing war and famine, when that simply isn't true, is either a deliberate lie or she doesn't know her facts. It really seems to me that she's using the same dog whistling that this Conservative Party, which I don't recognise anymore, has used since around 2016.
OK, Steve, thank you very much indeed. More of your calls to come. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
Meet
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
21 minutes past 8. Let me reintroduce you to my panel. Roger Mosey is Master of Selwyn College, Cambridge, but spent many years in charge of television and radio, and indeed of the broadcast coverage of the Olympic Games, I think I'm right in saying, Roger. So I think you held virtually every senior post at the BBC, apart from Director General. And there's still time.
Yeah, and London 2012 was a good moment, and I wish we could have some of that back.
Oh, don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. John Caudwell is a philanthropist and businessman and founder of Phones for You. Aisha Ali-Khan is a writer and activist, and Rebecca Reid is a journalist and author. Right, we have a really good email question here. You can, of course, phone in with your questions. You can text 84850 or also email your question to Iain, IAIN, @lbc.co.uk. Peter Jones says, how important is high-speed rail to the success of the UK economy? I saw that John Caudwell is on the panel tonight. As someone who made a fortune with a company that he headquartered in Stoke-on-Trent, I'm interested to hear if poor rail service disadvantaged his growth. Well, not on the face of it, did it? Do the panel think this week's HS2 downgrade will disadvantage up-and-coming companies like John's was, but based in Yorkshire? Well, let's come to you first, John.
Yes, well, I think as far as Stoke-on-Trent goes, it's lucky enough to have a phenomenal rail service with London, 1 hour 20 from Stoke or Stafford to Euston. So no disadvantage there at all because it's a quick service and it's an excellent service. But I think the disappointing thing is that if we were going to have HS2, it's already connected well by the current services. And as I understand it, HS2 was going to be connecting Leeds and Yorkshire, and that's the bit that we're scrapping. Now, I understand the government's need, especially post-COVID, to try and cut costs, but that's utterly out of line with all the recommendations I've made to government, because under Caudwell Pandemic Recovery, which was a 4-point action scheme, one of the things I said that we've really got to invest in is infrastructure. And under Boris Johnson's own statement of levelling up the country, it doesn't seem to fit very well that we just throw off Lancashire and Yorkshire in the HS2 cost-saving situation. So I'm a bit disappointed that that's happened, because it is out of line, and it's out of line with where we need to go in the future.
Some people are saying, well, given COVID, the business case for HS2 has collapsed because it was predominantly based on business people being able to get around the country more quickly. But of course, many people are using, well, what we're using with Aisha and Roger tonight, Zoom. We'd never heard of Zoom. Well, a lot of people had never heard of Zoom 18 months ago. Now we all use it as a matter of routine. That has changed the game, hasn't it?
To an extent, and thank goodness for Zoom and team, because it has enabled us to carry on to some extent. But as most of us know that use it, it's a poor substitute for face-to-face meetings where you've got a room full of people, you can interrupt and you can debate. And
I think Aisha can interrupt you whenever she likes. Right?
And see the colour and the white of their eyes. And there's no substitute for face-to-face meetings, but I think what it has taught us is that we can eliminate some of the travel and use these internet-based services effectively in some cases.
Okay, Rebecca.
I think that interconnectivity in this country is pretty horrific. We are a terribly London-centric society, and I say that somebody who has lived their entire life in London. But whenever I've spent time with family outside of London, I'm shocked by the lack of options getting around from place to place on public transport. Where my parents live, it costs £7.50 to get a 5-mile bus. That is an extraordinary amount of money.
Be true.
That is genuinely
true.
That is the 252, and it's an East Sussex bus, and it's predominantly because it's used by children and pensioners, so people don't pay for it. But the point is, it is incredibly expensive and very hard to get around if you don't drive outside of London. So I think perhaps the thing I'm more worried about is people's ability to travel freely around the country, not just to London, but from their village to a bigger town and smaller towns to larger towns, because that really traps people in their small villages. It really enables people, it really prevents people from being able to find job opportunities outside of where they live. And I think generally speaking, we have got to stop seeing London as the end of everything. Not everything needs to be in London.
I would happily be trapped in my Norfolk village for the rest of time and never emerge. Aisha, let's come to you next.
I think, the announcements around HS2 and scrapping of the Leeds leg of the HS2 route, it's just, I mean, I live in Keighley. If I need to get anywhere, I either have to go to Leeds or to Bradford. And Bradford, people in Bradford, especially businessmen, we're just really disappointed that this is what the government decided. And again, it was decided without any real consultation of what people on the ground think. Now, Bradford really need investment, not only in its infrastructure, in its travel infrastructure, but also to connect it up to Leeds and to Manchester. We just cannot compete with the travel options available. Like I said, I travel to London quite regularly. It takes me 2 hours, 15 minutes from Leeds, and 3.5 hours from Bradford. So I just avoid Bradford like the plague, because time is money, and it takes a large chunk of your day if you're spending 3.5 hours on sitting on the train. I do think we need more infrastructure. We need to bring more job opportunities to the north, and especially to cities like Bradford, because we've just been left behind for decades and decades. This idea, this myth that there's all this money and we're going to have this northern powerhouse happening. We've got Manchester on one side, we've got Leeds on the other side, and we just cannot compete. So it's a real disappointment, and I just feel that this is going to set us back decades. It's going to be years and years before we get another opportunity to see that kind of investment that was being promised by the government, and it's such a shame, because we're letting down another generation of people in Bradford.
Their contention, of course, is that they're spending £96 billion on extra rail services. Now, I think some of that was, should we say, pre-announced. But I mean, that is an enormous figure. Even if HS2 isn't going to be completed, or the eastern leg of it isn't going to be completed, there are still masses of localised rail schemes that surely will improve travel times and will improve people's lives. Aisha.
Oh, sorry. We say this, let's see if it happens. I've tried to use the train service between Leeds and Bradford a number of times, Leeds and Dewsbury, etc., etc. If it's delayed, if there are train cancellations, if there are leaves on the tracks, any number one of excuses, and that just adds hours onto your journey. It's much easier just to get into a car and drive, which then contributes to the pollution, it contributes to congestion on the roads, and then obviously we've got this drive to move away from cars to electric cars, from diesel cars and petrol cars to electric cars. It's a real mess, and until we actually come up with a solution, and when I say solutions, I don't mean just talking about these things, actually implementing these plans as well, not just let's propose this plan, let's discuss this plan, let's kick the long grass.
That's the problem, isn't it? Because lots of things have been announced in terms of visionary transport infrastructure, but given the planning system, given the environmental concerns, they can sometimes take decades to happen. You look at Heathrow third runway, for example. I mean, Roger, let's come to you. That is an important point, though, isn't it? Because if you think of visionary transport infrastructure projects over the last 50 years, you come up with Crossrail and you come up with the Channel Tunnel, and that's probably about it.
Yeah, I come from Bradford, and Bradford is the 7th biggest city in the UK with the worst connections. So Aisha's completely right about that. I'm not so bothered in a way about connections with London for exactly the reasons that Rebecca says, which is that you've got to think more important, I think, about the east-west connections. And if people in Bradford want to go for shopping or a night out in Manchester or go to Leeds, the east-west connections are really, really important too. And the one bit of the infrastructure that I like the sound of was that you can make a journey from Bradford to Leeds in 12 minutes under the new plans, which at the moment is best part of half an hour. But I think you're right, Iain, that the visionary stuff is something we can aspire to. What I worry about more is making good local transit systems work and making sure those connections are east-west as well as north-south.
Right, we'll take more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. Just some breaking news. 4 suspected people traffickers have been arrested by French police. What took them so long, I would say? It's 8:30. David Dom has the news headlines.
31 people have died after their boat capsized while crossing the English Channel from France. 4 people have been arrested by French authorities. The French Interior Minister says 2 people have been rescued. A Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with 13 further offences, including rape, sexual assault assault and false imprisonment. 46-year-old David Carrick had previously been facing one count of rape, which he denies. 2 Metropolitan Police officers who shared photos of the bodies of 2 murdered sisters on WhatsApp have now been formally dismissed. The men have already admitted the offence in court. They'll be sentenced next month. LBC weather: patchy rain in the south through the night, showers in the far north and a low of 3.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. You're listening to or watching Cross Question. Roger Mosey is here, Master of Selwyn College, Cambridge. John Caudwell, philanthropist and founder of Phones for You. Aisha Ali-Khan, writer and activist. And Rebecca Reid, journalist and author. Right, let's go to our old friend Ulf in Hamburg. Ulf, guten Abend. What would you like to ask?
Moin moin, hello panel. I would like to ask the panel, what would they expect the new German government to do? What would they want them to do? And what would they want them decidedly not to do?
Well, a good choice there. Everyone's thinking, please don't come to me first, but I'm going to go to Aisha first.
And you, thank you for that, Iain.
Excellent.
Well, I think, can we just take a moment and just address the fact that Angela Merkel has, 16 years is a long time for any politician, and somebody who's been there, and she's seen so many changes. She's been popular, she's been unpopular, she's took a stand, quite strong stances actually. So it's going to be quite a new era for Germany, seeing the coalition that's been voted in, and the sort of focus on green energy and business, and sort of very introspectively inward looking agenda. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what Germany, how it's going to change, how the political landscape is going to change, and how that's going to impact the rest of Europe. Because right now, some of the policies that Germany led on, we're still feeling the aftermath of it. We're look at the migrant crisis that we've been talking about, the way Germany, in the aftermath of Brexit. So I really don't know. I think we're going to see something different, but it's a case of just watch this space.
Why is it, Roger Mosey, that German politics isn't covered in Britain as much as it might be? It's a continual source of frustration to me that the BBC, in fact most media, and we're probably guilty of it as much as anybody else, we just concentrate on America. Why is it that we don't cover the French presidential election in any really meaningful way? The German election, I mean, it's paid lip service to on the main news channels, but not to the extent that America is. And Germany, I mean, okay, it's not a superpower like America, but it's a very, very important country.
I think it's because German politics is quite dull when you look at it from the outside. And when you've got Trump and Biden in the United States, the whole debate with Merkel and the SPD and the rest of them looks rather tame by comparison. Of course, I think that's wrong. I think what happens in Germany is phenomenally important. And reading some of the information today about the new coalition, the most striking thing is how environmentally ambitious it's going to be. And I think all of us really want green policies to work. But the question is, will they, and at what cost? And of course, in Germany, they have the particular hurdle that Merkel shut down the nuclear power program. So how Germany is going to get the amount of wind and renewable energy they say they're going to do is going to be fascinating to watch. And I think we should be more interested in a country which has got such a leadership role in Europe, and where the dilemmas they're facing are just the same as we do here. They're all about the refugee crisis and a green future and trying to make the economies work after COVID. And therefore, we should be a lot more interested than we are in the whiz-bang of American politics.
So just to remind you of the question, John, what do you expect from the new German government? What do you hope for, and what are you apprehensive about?
Well, I wish I knew, but I can't pretend to answer that question intellectually, but one of the things that's very obvious about the most of Europe is the lack of philanthropy and the lack of charity that exists there. We all know that the US are the leaders in philanthropy. The UK are probably then second in the world. And so I think as much as anything, I would hope that a new government would lead on philanthropy and try and incentivise wealthy people to do the charitable work and help the government out with the huge challenge of making people's lives better.
I see what you did there. Turned it around to something that you really do know a lot
and
about.
that I'm passionate about, yes. And I'm very disappointed in Europe. Yeah. I'm hugely disappointed.
Why do you think that is? Because I always complain that we don't have that tradition of philanthropy that the Americans do. But right. And I wasn't aware that in Europe you're saying it's worse.
If you go to Spain, Germany, France, they don't give a darn. There's no philanthropy hardly at all. They do not understand it. Now, I think that's a tragedy. And you've got to try and incentivise people by rhetoric, by leadership, by rewards, by tax breaks. And people say to me, my philanthropy, it's just about saving tax. Well, if those people could explain to me how the 20% reduction I get in my money, it costs me 80% when I give $1 million, it costs me 800,000. The UK government contribute 200,000. If they could explain to me how that's a wonderful tax deal for me. But it helps. It helps to incentivise people. It helps to motivate them. And it makes a massive difference to charitable giving.
Right, Rebecca.
I think it would be nice to have a friend, and I'm not just saying that because things aren't always ideal when Germany and Britain aren't friends. I'm saying that because I think we are not popular with the French. We have maybe made ourselves relatively unpopular through Brexit, and so if they were open to having, I guess, some kind of special relationship, that would be quite exciting. I think we generally have quite similar values. We actually have a very similar sense of humour, I think. And also there's a lot that we can learn from Germany, particularly their renters' rights are astronomically better than ours. Their quality of life is very good. Their green policies are great. So I think there's a lot that we can emulate there, and that's quite exciting because I think you can if you can observe and learn from another country, that's always a really great moment.
If they are so good, though, why are all these refugees passing through Germany and through France and trying to get to the
Angela
UK?
Merkel took 1 million Syrian refugees in, didn't she? So
yes, but there's still
Germany
a lot coming through who are trying to get to the UK.
I think
they must see something very attractive about the UK.
I think one of the things is that if you have to flee a country, you'll go to somewhere that somebody you know is, or your cousin or your cousin's friend.
Or you can speak the language.
Or you can speak the language, and English is the language that most people can speak.
Ulf, what are you hoping for from your new government?
First of all, that they don't fall apart within a year. And second, yes, decided policy fighting climate change. When Mr. Habeck said something very interesting. They want to show that there is a way between nukes and coal on the one hand, and nukes and coal and alternative energy on the other hand. So it's just alternative energies and no nukes and no coal. They want to show that this is possible. As it has been said, that's going to be interesting to observe. I would like to make a few comments regarding philanthropy. There are lots of philanthropic charities in Germany, and most of them are in Hamburg by chance. And maybe this movement is not so strong in Germany because we got a functional welfare state. Always had it for over 100 years.
Shots fired.
Well, fighting talk.
Definitely.
One more thing. You want a friend? Oh, we don't. We like friends, but we prefer friends whom we can trust.
Ooh, that's me told.
He's a feisty one.
He's great.
He's a regular caller. But what do you make about the fact that you've now got another Green foreign minister? What do you think the relations between Britain and Germany are going to be like?
Good question. First of all, I'm not sure that Mrs. Baerbock is going to be all that great a foreign minister. Second, it's absolutely sure that she will not be so important because the important decisions will be made by the Chancellor. Just compare the role of the present German foreign minister and Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel calls the shots, and I can't even remember the guy's name at the moment. He's a bit of a douche anyway. So the foreign minister never is that important. The relationship between the UK and Germany, it will be determined by how the British government behaves in the future. So I'm a bit pessimistic about it.
Oh, we must behave, otherwise we will be punished. Ulf, thank you very much.
Wonderfully, of course.
I'm a big fan, Ulf.
Ulf, thank you very much indeed. That's Ulf in Hamburg. We're going to come to a really good text question next. If you'd like to give us a call to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:44.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
The government now has confirmed the so-called Harper's Law. Offenders who kill emergency workers while committing a criminal act will be given a mandatory life term. Justice Secretary Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, is there any discretion afforded when it comes to sentencing with Harper's Law?
There is some discretion for a judge in truly exceptional circumstances. We do not want the thing being undermined by the back door. We're on the side of the emergency workers who put themselves on the line for us every day. That's what we stand for, and that's what I'm pleased we're going to be introducing.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
All the
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:47. Well, we've had one question on HS2 that was kind of directed at John. I think this one's directed at Roger. Kelly in Bristol texts, the Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, seems to keep threatening the BBC. Does the BBC have a future? Well, Roger, if you don't know, no one does.
I hope it does. I spent many happy years in the BBC, and I think we need the BBC as a guarantor of public broadcasting in the UK. And there are plenty of other sources and voices, and LBC is a really important one, but the BBC is the place where we all pay for it, and we need to reflect the whole of the country. I think Nadine Dorries is right to want the BBC to be held to the highest possible standards. What I'm less keen on is the way she takes individual interviews like Nick Robinson and Boris Johnson and appears to brief that, the BBC is going to lose a lot of money because that interview wasn't very good. And that is not the right way to look at public broadcasting in the UK. But do we need it? We certainly do. Is the BBC perfect? Certainly not. And the BBC does need to reform and change, but I'm pretty confident it will be able to do that.
In what way does it need to reform and change?
Well, I think it does need to work on impartiality. It's very interesting that Tim Davie, as the relatively new Director General, said the single most important thing at the top of his list was impartiality. And I think it's because the BBC hasn't been representing the whole country enough. I think it missed the tide that became the Brexit result. It didn't call the 2019 general election very well. And I think if the BBC had been based in Sunderland or Leeds, it would have had more of a sense of what was going on in the country. And it needs to make sure that if they expect everyone to pay for it, it's got to be something which appears to listen to the voices of the people and speak their voices back to them. And it can't be like The Guardian or the New York Times that go into a sort of liberal redoubt. It can't be like the Telegraph or Mail. It has to be something universal. And it hasn't in the past been quite as good at that as it should have been.
But that's Nadine Dorries' point, isn't it? That it is a bit like the New York Times and the Guardian. And I mean, she, in an interview with me at the Conservative conference, she was having a go at Andrew Marr, saying that he wasn't impartial. And I said, well, he absolutely would say that he is. Obviously, he's joining us now, so he'll be much less impartial, but and actually be allowed to give an opinion. But she's got a point, hasn't she? In that. And Andrew Marr himself said this many years ago, that the BBC has a liberal outlook on things, and it tends to employ similar types of people. And you don't get, I mean, we were talking to Alan Milburn earlier about social mobility, and he was saying that law firms and consultancies, they've made huge strides in employing a really diverse group of people, not just from ethnic minorities, but working class people as well. I doubt whether the BBC News and Current Affairs Department knows what the term working class actually means, because there aren't many people that work in it.
The BBC needs to be more diverse, and diversity is everything. It's ethnicity, it's gender, it's socioeconomic background, it's geography. So I agree that the BBC can be much broader in terms of representing the UK. What I don't think is, I don't think it runs a party political agenda. I don't think it's pro-Labour and certainly not pro-Conservative. I think it can be liberal in its outlook. And that is sometimes a benign and nice thing for a public broadcaster to want to be, but it has to recognise that this country has a lot of diversity of thought, and you've got to get that on the airwaves too.
Rebecca?
I think the difficult thing is that, generally speaking, creative people tend to be more liberal. And also, there is a real issue that if you come from a family where there wasn't a lot of money and you've done very well educationally, you're likely to look for the thing that's going to make you a lot of money and have a long career. And unfortunately, going into journalism particularly is not the way to do that anymore. So I think it does attract a particular type of person. But when we talk about impartiality, all of my very lefty friends think the BBC is really right-wing, and all of my really right-wing friends think the BBC is really left-wing, which to me suggests that they're roughly somewhere in the middle.
I always think that's a really lazy way of thinking about these things, if you don't mind me saying so.
I've heard other people say they don't like that, but I think it does seem relatively new. I genuinely do. I also really struggle that the person who is in charge of culture wrote a book called Nurses of Lovely Lane, which is truly the worst piece of culture possibly that this country owns.
Yeah, but see, you're looking down your middle-class nose at a working-class Secretary of State for Culture who pulled herself up by her bootstraps, and she's written books that have sold millions of copies.
They're not very good, though, and I've written...
Well, you might not like them, but they sell millions. How many of your books sold compared to hers?
Absolutely don't know, but guaranteed less. But my point, well, actually, that really was just me being flippant. But my point is, I think she is relatively snide, and I'm not sure how much she genuinely loves culture, because the BBC created things like, it incubated things like Fleabag. It does EastEnders, which is probably one of the greatest works of art because it is so long running and so meaningful to so many people. Absolutely not. Particularly for people who are lonely, EastEnders is a real anchor point in people's days. Soaps are essential.
Like this programme.
Genuinely, probably yes. So I think if you can't see the good in the BBC, you're missing a lot of really important points.
John?
Well, I whether it's impartial or not, I struggle to really judge, because, like Rebecca, I do hear the criticisms both ways. You know, it's either too right-wing or too left-wing, but regardless of that point of impartiality, I think the BBC has got one hell of a struggle to survive, because it's probably the most expensive television in the world. You know, you've got all of these other channels competing with it, all the news channels and all the other channels, all the reality TV. The whole lot is competing with the BBC, and the BBC is very expensive for people to have to be compulsory subscribing to. So I think that's going to be a huge commercial challenge going forward.
What about the way it covers business? Because I've been very critical about the lack of business coverage on the BBC. And if you think of it as a public service broadcaster, I mean, business doesn't really get much of a look in. You get a little bit on the Today programme, you get a little bit on 5 Live if you're lucky, and that's about it now.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I've never really thought about that, but I've done quite a few interviews on BBC, but probably more on other channels than the BBC. So that's probably a true observation.
You stick with us. Aisha?
Gosh, I think, especially given the recent scandals with the royal family, I think that's really affected trust, the way the BBC have reported, just the documentary the other night. It just seems that a lot of people are struggling, especially after the Martin Bashir scandal and the sort of non-apology that was given, and the fact that it took years and years and so on, and the fact that Martin Bashir was never really disciplined or censored or questioned or anything for such a long time. I think it really has affected people's opinions about the BBC and also its impartiality as well. Having said that, every time I've travelled abroad, and we're talking pre-COVID times here, I've always tuned into the World Service because I've always trusted it, and I've always felt that it offered a much wider range of topics and subjects that really, I found interesting. But actually, this evening I was just sitting here and thinking, when was the last time I actually watched something on the BBC? I just don't have time. Even when I do have time, there's so many other options out there. People just, for what we're paying and for what we're getting and what we're accessing, it just doesn't seem right now value for money. And I think that conversation is going to continue, that debate is going to continue. So I think, there's a lot of repairing that the BBC needs to do in terms of public trust.
All right, thank you very much. We've just got time, I think, for Munesh in Southall. He's got a very important question, but I'm going to have to ask you all for some very short answers. Munesh, go ahead, please.
Good evening, panel and LBC. My question is, do you agree with me that the latest revolutions that have gone with the Conservative Party members and the corruption, has that diminished our value in the global arena and reduced our reputation to a lower level? And secondly, does the panel agree that perhaps it's a good idea that Rishi Sunak should swap sides and come to the Labour Party?
Well, let's leave that last one to one side because we've literally got 45 seconds each. John?
Well, I think any corruption is utterly undesirable and should be criminalised. And if I were Prime Minister, these MPs would know exactly where they stood. They would not be allowed to cross any boundaries, and they would be prosecuted if found to be behaving illegally.
You're putting yourself forward.
Sorry?
You're putting yourself forward as an arbiter of...
No, I am not. I'm not putting myself forward at all. Okay. Lots of people put me forward, but I'm not. But I would like to see greater fidelity amongst MPs. And I think the law needs changing. You know, when he was going to be suspended for 30 days for what I would deem to be fraud. If I were Prime Minister, I would deem that to be fraud. And they would know they were going to face criminal prosecution. We have to be able to trust our MPs be doing the right thing for everybody.
Roger?
Well, I think the two things are true. The scandals in Britain and sleaze are terrible, and I think we should be unforgiving of the people who've done the things that have been reported recently. On the other hand, British scandals do tend to be a bit rather small scale compared with many abroad, and ours tend to be about things like repairing your moats or duck houses and all that sort of thing. And I don't think
not
we're
really
quite on the
Enron or
epic...
Watergate, is it?
No, exactly. It's not on an epic scale, but it's still bad.
Aisha?
I think, given the recent interview by Boris, we're a laughing stock. It was just a joke across the world. And when people look at our leadership, and not just Boris, I'm talking about his government as well, it's just shocking that so many people have been allowed to get away, so many MPs have been allowed to get away with all sorts of things. And we're not just talking about the corruption and the sleaze. I'm talking about when the MP was accused of sexual assault. He was suspended. There was a real attempt to kind of brush it under the carpet. Again, we need to talk about these things, and we need to hold people to account, but we can't do so with the current sort of media that we have in place that are protecting those in power and allowing them to get away with it.
Do you actually ever listen to LBC? I think we do hold people to account quite well, actually. Well, thank you very much. You can come back. Rebecca?
I think, unfortunately, I just assume that all politicians are a bit bent. I really do.
That is such a terrible thing.
I do. I just sort of go, oh, well, unsurprising, really. However, I thought his comment about Rishi was interesting, but I don't want him to go to Labour because I think then he probably won't win. I do think Rishi probably is the next Prime Minister, and I think that might be a good thing. I'm tentatively hopeful.
And on that bombshell, Minesh, thank you very much. Let's go to a final text question from Phil in Basildon. The phrase NFT is the Collins Dictionary word of the year. Do you have any idea what an NFT is?
I do.
And what would your word of the year be? Rebecca, you know what it is.
I actually do.
Us.
I think it's a non-fungible token. Is that correct?
What is that?
If you invent something or create something on the internet, it's sort of a bit like copywriting it, and it means you can make money out of it.
Right. Okay. That's very exciting.
I know.
Is that what your word of the year? Do you have another word of the year?
I don't think that... my word of the year is always feminism every year. Oh, your
Roger.
face.
Yeah, I thought it meant National Film Theatre until I read it.
You're so classy, though.
Yeah, and I think my word would be treble vaxxed, if that is a word.
Well, it should be. Aisha?
Gosh, I can't think of anything right now. There are so many ideas and they've just gone. I'm too boring. I'll say education because that's something that it's so important. We just can't keep on ignoring the education services of this country. As a teacher, I'm talking as a teacher here.
You might have just as well said, just think of the children. John?
Non-fungible tokens, I find it a very difficult concept to understand. But my word for the forever would be fairness.
Oh, God, we're all having a group hug, aren't
note,
we? Goodness me.
Well, I liked it. I thought that was
Shall we all
lovely.
sing Kumbaya to finish the hour? I'll tell you what. The atmosphere in this studio and on Zoom is rather different to last night's atmosphere, I have to say. If you missed last night's cross question, do listen to it on the podcast or watch it on YouTube. It was quite something.
Very cross
with
questions.
Andrea and Shola. Very, very cross question. Listen, thank you all very much indeed. Aisha, Roger, John and Rebecca. We'll have you all back very, very soon. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to continue our phone-in on the tragic events in the English Channel today. Who is to blame? What can be done to make sure that this doesn't ever happen again? It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Prime Minister says people trafficking gangs are getting away with murder following the deaths of 31 migrants. 5 women and a young girl were among those killed when their boat